Experience Karen Hunter in a completely different way. Karen Hunter is awesome. The podcast.
If you like me on SiriusXM Urban View Channel 126, you're gonna love me in Karen Hunter is Awesome. Hey, this is Karen Hunter, host of the Karen Hunter Show on SiriusXM's Urban View. Karen Hunter is Awesome is an actual podcast to bring heat and energy and knowledge and power, a 1-2 punch that I don't think you get anyplace else. Tell the truth. Check out the podcast wherever you get your podcast. You will not be disappointed.
Everybody knows what solitary confinement is, right? But and somehow we just accept it. It's like, well, that's a thing that we are willing to accept because the people that it happens to are people that we have been willing to write off as not mattering or not us, not part of the collective. I see a connection between this and Mr. Khalil, who was abducted at Columbia. The reaction that many people, I would say white people, were having to this abduction was, well, I'm sure that his wife is very concerned. The words that I was hearing used around this man's abduction, concerned, worried, if it was their own family member, it is something that they would not accept. That there would be terror. They would use the accurate words there, that not these words that have distance between them, to echo your point about the way we feel about people in solitary confinement. But, I'm sure I would be very concerned if it was my husband. No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't be concerned. You would be losing your mind. And that this is something that we're willing to accept because of who it's happening to. And that makes me again think of what we started this with. We were talking about your student that is, Karen wanted to talk about this, I think, your student that was afraid to come to campus.
When we came in. Can you share with us, Dr. Foreman?
Well, yeah, it was just the first thing that I said when we, before, you started the show, but I just came from my office hours and I was meeting with a student and she was scheduled to meet with me in person. In my office, and at the last minute, I got a notice from my assistant that she was switching it to Zoom. And we got on, and she said, "I'm sorry, I know I was supposed to be there in person, but I don't have classes today otherwise, and I don't feel safe leaving my home. As much as possible, I'm trying to stay in my apartment." And I asked her why. And I knew the answer, but I wanted to give her a chance to talk about it as well. And she said, because, she's a student, she's from, I don't want to say the country even to identify her in that way, but she's, from a country that is one of those countries that we are targeting people who are from there. She has a completely valid, her visa is valid. She's in first year in law school. And she said she was feeling okay, but she saw the video over the weekend of the student up in Boston, the student that was at Tufts. And I know a lot of people have seen that video. And if you haven't, then, you could just Google it, Tufts video, student abduction, and you'll be able to see it. And seeing that video has caused her to be so fearful to the point where she's avoiding leaving her house unless she absolutely has to. And I was talking to her about it, right? And I was like, this is so terrible on so many levels, but just at the basic level, law school is hard. Law school is hard. It is hard to get through law school in the best of circumstances. With all resources and networks at your disposal, it's still hard. And now you're trying to get through law school where you have this hanging over your head where, and she's battling. She told me, I'm trying to not be paranoid. I don't want to let my fear take over my existence to the point that I can't study, right? Because that would be the greatest defeat, would be to quit, to give up. So I don't want to do that, but it's really hard. And my heart just goes out to her. And I think about students like that all over the country. And if you have a listener who doesn't have someone like that in their life, so they haven't had that direct conversation, I would just encourage you to try to get yourself educated, because if you aren't living that fear right now, that somebody is. And you need to be in touch with them so you can understand, again, what's happening in our name, our tax dollars.
We're talking with Professor James Foreman, Yale Law, but you can also check him out in Eyes on the Prize 3, which right now I think is on Max. It's on Max. I think it's on Max. Yeah. Where are we right now? I'm having these conversations every day. It's a live show. And people are telling me what this administration can't do. And I'm like, this administration can do whatever the law allows. And right now they have all branches of government under lock, right? So who's going to check them? Which everything could be illegal until it's not. I mean, slavery was legal. Jim Crow in the South was legal. We're battling semantics right now, when the reality is this administration has all the levers of power. Our recourse is showing up tomorrow in Florida, is showing up as you did this weekend in Louisiana, is showing up for the midterms. But even that may not be enough. So what are you teaching your students? I had a crisis in the classroom myself trying to teach journalism in a world that clearly has abandoned the tenets of journalism. What was I sending my students out into if it didn't exist anymore? So I decided to teach them life. What are you doing in the classroom, and how do we navigate these strange waters?
I mean, your question is the question, right? For all of us. And we're talking about it in the classroom because we have that in common, right? You're talking to somebody who is a teacher, but really you could ask that question to anybody in whatever space they're in. For me, you're right. It is a challenge because on the one hand, there's material that I want to teach, right? There are things that we want to cover. I run a program where we recruit students who are first generation students from around the New Haven area, and we make it possible for them to go to law school. You could think of it as a kind of a pipeline program. Well, when I'm in that class, I want to talk about the work of that, right? That work is pressing. Our fellows need people to be there to help them prepare for the LSAT, to write there, to help them with their admissions essays. We can't spend all of our time talking about something else and then lose sight of what we're supposed to be doing collectively. At the same time, you don't want to have a classroom environment that ignores what's happening around you. I'm old enough that I was in law school and I was telling my students about this, I was in law school when Rodney King was beat and those officers went on trial. And anybody who was alive then knows that we were sure those officers were going to be convicted because it was on video. That was the first time it ever been on video. Now, my students know now that just because it's on video doesn't mean you're going to get a conviction. But we were sure that they were going to be convicted. We were like, well, of course, these officers are going to be convicted. But what about the next time when it's not on video? Then, of course, those officers were acquitted, right? And LA goes up in flames. And as a law student then, I felt like, wow, this legal system that I've been studying is clearly not working, even in a situation that is so obvious and so extreme. What is the purpose of what I'm doing? Why am I here studying these rules if at the one time we need them, they mean nothing? And I almost dropped out. And at the time, I didn't have any professor in school who was talking about, we went to class the next day like it was any other class. And for the Black students at the school, it was completely alienating and demoralizing to not feel like, well, no one cared. So, right, at the same time as I'm trying to teach the material that is so important, I also have to create space for my students to process what's happening. And I have to remind them that I know that today's not like every other day. Because it doesn't feel like every other day to them. And so that's and Karen, I imagine that's the conflict you were feeling, right? Because there's tenets of journalism that you want to teach, right? There are things that you need to learn. So you want to teach that, but at the same time, you can't ignore what's happening.
I tapped out, just so you know. I can't.
You made your decision.
I don't. Yeah, no, I said I can no longer uphold this because it's not coming back. Journalism that I was raised on is not coming back. So we have a different fight now. And I imagine on the front that you're on, it's a different fight. So we're an action show. I need a little history background if we think about policing, which we must. Everyone who's listening to my voice, you live somewhere. What should the police look like? If you were able to craft a system that punishes, I guess, or holds people accountable for crimes, what would that look like in James Foreman's mind?
For me, I guess where I would start is I would like the police department in my dream world. And I do believe that we have to have something that we call police officers. So I do believe that. Not everybody believes that, and I respect those who don't, but I do believe it. I would like them to be focused on the most serious and violent offenses. So right now we have a situation where you can find police everywhere in a neighborhood, right? They're stopping and frisking, they're pulling over cars, they're using traffic stops as a pretext to look inside somebody's car. But if you live in a low-income neighborhood and there's a robbery or there's a burglary and you call to get a police officer to work on that case, they might not come for 24 hours, 48 hours. You know, there's a quote from a woman in Louisiana that I came across the other day. It's from a couple of years ago. But she said, you know, the police are everywhere in my neighborhood except when I need them.
Correct. How come you weren't here before the person broke in the house? You know, how come you weren't here before the person stole my car? If you're here, you know where the drug dealers are. Why are they still selling drugs? Why aren't they up off the street? To your point, Joy DeGruy Leary would say the system is working the way it was designed. It's not broken. Francis Cress Welsing would say it's not broken. Neely Fuller would say it's not broken. It's working the way it was designed. So how do we design a better system? And I agree with you. I think wellness checks, Tatiana Jefferson, Sonia Massey, should not end in death.
Yeah, you are so right. I think that, you know, when I look for inspiration in this space, you know, I think of organizations like a PAD in Atlanta. So I'm from Atlanta, and a couple of years ago, in response to the point that you just made about wellness checks, a group of leaders together, community organizers, came together and said, let us try to build out a system, build out a network where if a person is homeless, or a person is in mental health crisis, or a person is suffering from addiction, or a person is suffering from something related to poverty, there will be a number that a citizen can call, that a person can call to say, hey, I see somebody out on the corner. They need attention, but what they don't need a police officer. They need somebody who is going to be able to come up in a van and so the PAD vans are full of food, they're full of healthcare, they're full of people with a social worker mentality and who are trained at connecting people to resources. And I've ridden with them and I've seen them go up to folks on the street, folks camped out, folks who are clearly struggling, right? And talk to them and work with them and build that relationship. And it might not be the first conversation that leads to the better thing happening. They might have to come back that afternoon. They might have to come back in a couple of days. But they build those relationships, and over time, they're able to connect folks to the resources that they need so that they can get help. So in my mind, in my dream world, that kind of care would be as ubiquitous, it would be as available, it would be as ever present as the 911 call can be right now. We know we've been trained to think of 911 as the number to call for everything. But we have to build up those other resources so that there is another number to call and somebody's going to answer. Because that's the one thing about 911 is that somebody will pick up. Josie Duffy Rice, I don't know if you've had her on the show, but if not, you should. She's a wonderful thinker and writer and scholar in Atlanta. And she tells a story about the time when a huge bird flew into her house. A hawk. It was a hawk flew into her house. And she is one of these people who's committed to using police less. And so she freaked out. She ran into the other room. She closed the door. She's got a child in the other room. They're in the door. And she's like, I'm not going to call 911. I'm not going to call 911. I've been trained. Don't call 911 all the time. So she's like on her phone trying to find a number for somebody else to call, right? Somebody other than 911. So she's like, Georgia Animal Welfare Control. So she's like, okay, she calls them. No answer, right? 6 o'clock. They've left. She finds some other number, Humane Society. She finally gets somebody to answer. She's like, there's a hawk in my living room. And you know what they told her? They said, call 911.
Yeah.
So that, right? So like it's, people are critical of the police and I understand that. But it's also the case that in a lot of places, we've given them that responsibility, right? And nobody else thinks it's their job to come at 7 o'clock and deal with the hawk that flew into your house. But somebody needs to.
Well, in neighborhoods that are melanemic, if your cat is stuck in a tree, you can feel safe to do that. We can't, those of us with melanin feel safe. The police are not our friends. They're not going to rescue Tabby the cat. We're talking with James Foreman Jr. Olivia A. Cole is here. And I didn't realize this, but 911 didn't exist when I was born. My parents didn't have 911 to call when I was born. It didn't come into play until 1968, and it was AT&T, American Telephone and Telegraph Company, that announced that they would have this service that they would reserve for emergency contacts. AT&T, a private company, instituted a 911 in the United States, and the first call was made in Haleyville, Alabama, which is fascinating. That history, we were talking before you came about the Freedman House. A lot of things come because we need them. So I've been doing this since the election. Everyone lives somewhere. What is needed in your community? What do you need, and how do you make it happen? Yes, we have elected officials, but some of this stuff is going to have to come from our imagination and then making it happen. Who's paying for PAD? It's PAD?
PAD, yeah. You should have somebody from them on your show because they are a terrific organization. They are paid for in part by the city government, and they are also supported in part by nonprofit philanthropy. I'm not sure the balance. Like, I don't know if it's mostly government or mostly, philanthropic funding. But the one other thing to say about PAD that I like so much is that, the point, Karen, you were making about AT&T created 911 and we're going to have to use our imaginations. So what they said is, look, we want to create a number that people can remember and use as easily as 911. So in Atlanta, there's a 311 system. A lot of cities have it, but most people don't really use it very much because they don't know, well, what do I get if I call 311? They have connected up they're a nonprofit, but they've connected up with the 311 system. And they've trained the operators who are city officials, city employees who answer the phone. If you call 311, they've trained them that if the call relates to any of these areas, mental illness, addiction, homelessness, poverty, to call PAD. And so it's a kind of, I guess you could say, a partnership between the nonprofit community and kind of an upstart organization and the city government. And it's one thing, and their theory, which I endorse, is that over time, this is the way to make it everywhere, to make it easy for people to remember. If you give people another 10-digit number that they're supposed to remember, that's never going to work, right? But if you over time can create the mentality in people that says, okay, if it's a crime, if someone, is breaking into the house, 911. But if there's a person struggling and they look like maybe they need some support or some resources, 311.
Well, I think it comes back to also what you were saying a moment ago about when you did a ride along and, the coming to somebody who's on the street and clearly struggling. It's like, okay, maybe not the first time will you get the outcome, but maybe that afternoon or maybe the next day. It's the same thing with using that kind of resource. It takes time to get into people's brains because, as Karen said, 911 is not this eternal invention that has always been with us. People got accustomed to it and used it, and then it became the norm. This can become the norm too.
Experience Karen Hunter in a completely different way. Karen Hunter is awesome. The podcast.
If you like me on SiriusXM Urban View Channel 126, you're gonna love me. And Karen Hunter is awesome. Hey, this is Karen Hunter, host of the Karen Hunter Show on SiriusXM's Urban View. Karen Hunter is awesome is an actual podcast to bring heat and energy and knowledge and power. A 1-2 punch that I don't think you get anyplace else. Tell the truth. Check out the podcast wherever you get your podcast. You will not be disappointed.